He had nothing but a cardboard sign and 3 words that would change everything. To most, he was invisible. A homeless black man standing on a corner, ignored, overlooked, forgotten. But when a billionaire's desperate cry for help echoed through the streets, the world turned its eyes on him. What followed wasn't just unexpected. It revealed the cruel divide between wealth and survival, dignity and prejudice. This is the story of how one man's voice shattered silence, and why his words still demand to be heard. The question is, will we listen? For years, Marcus lived on the edges of a city that never seemed to see him. Once a skilled mechanic, life had unraveled after a string of bad luck, layoffs, medical bills, and finally, the loss of his home. Each morning he found himself in the same spot downtown, holding a cardboard sign with quiet dignity, never begging, just existing. People passed by in suits and expensive cars, their eyes fixed anywhere but on him. To them, Marcus wasn't part of the city. He was a shadow. Yet despite everything, he carried himself with pride. He kept his clothes as clean as he could, fixed broken bicycles for neighborhood kids, and always greeted strangers with a nod. Beneath the hardship was a man who hadn't given up on decency, even if the world had given up on him. But what happens when someone invisible is suddenly thrust into the spotlight? What happens when the man nobody noticed becomes the only one who can help? Marcus was about to discover that sometimes fate doesn't knock. It collides, and when it does, it forces the world to look straight into the truths it tries to ignore. The turning point came on a sweltering afternoon. Marcus stood at his usual corner, the cardboard sign balanced in his hands. He had written 3 words in thick black marker, simple, hopeful, almost defiant. I can fix this. Most people hurried past, their eyes locked on phones, their windows rolled up tight. To them, it was just another slogan from another homeless man. But for Marcus, it was more than words. It was his identity, a reminder of the skills he still carried inside him, no matter how invisible the world tried to make him. Then, out of nowhere, the scream echoed through the street. A luxury car had stalled in the middle of the intersection, blocking traffic. Horns blared, drivers cursed, and from behind the tinted glass, a man stepped out, his designer suit clashing with the chaos around him. It was Richard Halden, a billionaire whose face Marcus had seen on billboards and in magazines. The city admired him for his wealth, his power, his empire. But in that moment, Halden looked lost, desperate, waving his arms as the car refused to move. People watched, but no one helped. Some filmed with their phones, amused that the man who had everything couldn't control a machine worth more than most homes. That's when Marcus moved. He set down his sign, walked through the honking traffic, and approached the broken-down car. For a moment, silence fell over the crowd. A homeless black man, stepping into the spotlight of a billionaire's embarrassment. It was a scene made for judgment. Whispers spread. A few drivers sneered, muttering insults under their breath. One shouted out of his window, "Don't touch that car, you'll scratch it!" Others laughed, their voices laced with the kind of mockery Marcus knew too well. He had been treated like a threat for nothing more than existing, and now, even as he tried to help, suspicion clung to him like a shadow. Still, Marcus knelt by the car, ignoring the sting of their words. His hands, scarred but steady, traced the problem with the ease of someone who once lived in a garage filled with tools and grease. Within minutes, he found it. A loose connection, something simple, something he could fix. But just as he reached for it, flashing lights cut through the noise. A patrol car pulled up, sirens slicing the air. 2 officers stepped out, their hands hovering near their belts. They didn't look at the billionaire. They didn't ask who needed help. Their eyes locked on Marcus. "Step away from the vehicle," one barked, his tone sharp and final. The crowd shifted, phones lifted higher, the scene transforming into a spectacle. Marcus froze, his pulse hammering in his ears. He had done nothing wrong, just answered a cry for help. Yet in their eyes, he wasn't a man fixing a car. He was a suspect. Halden's voice tried to cut through the tension, but the officers barely listened. To them, Marcus didn't belong anywhere near a luxury car, let alone beside a billionaire. And in that moment, as the weight of every stare pressed down on him, Marcus realized that his act of kindness had turned into something far more dangerous. What would happen next would not only define him, but expose a truth the city could no longer ignore. The crowd held its breath as the officers closed in. Marcus slowly lifted his hands, grease still staining his palms, the cardboard sign lying forgotten on the pavement. The billionaire's voice rang out, frustrated, desperate. "He's helping me!" But the words barely registered. The officers didn't lower their guard. To them, Marcus wasn't a helper. He was a threat standing too close to wealth and power. One officer's hand hovered near his holster. The other shouted commands that blurred into the chaos of honking horns and murmuring voices. Phones tilted higher, catching every second. Marcus could feel the sting of 1,000 unseen judgments pressing down on him, another black man in the crosshairs, guilty of nothing but existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. His chest tightened. Every story he had heard, every headline about men who never made it home, rushed through his mind. One wrong move, one twitch mistaken for defiance, and he would become another statistic. He had come to fix a car, but now he was fighting to hold on to his dignity, maybe even his life. The billionaire stepped forward, shouting louder this time, his voice breaking through the sirens and shouts. "If you arrest him, you'll answer to me." The crowd gasped, not out of compassion, but because they weren't used to seeing power stand beside someone like Marcus. For the first time, the city's wealth and its forgotten soul collided on the same stage. Marcus stood there, his heart pounding, the flashing lights painting his face in harsh red and blue. Every second stretched into eternity. Would the officers pull him away in cuffs, branding him a criminal for daring to help? Or would the truth finally cut through the fear, forcing everyone to see him for who he truly was? The world seemed to balance on a razor's edge, and in that moment Marcus realized his life was no longer just his own. The standoff finally broke when the billionaire stepped between Marcus and the officers, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and urgency. "He's not a criminal. He saved me." The words forced the officers to pause, though their eyes lingered on Marcus with suspicion that no apology could erase. Slowly the tension eased, the sirens dimmed, and the crowd began to disperse. But for Marcus, the damage had already been done. He had fixed the problem, just as his sign promised. Yet the world didn't see his skill first. They saw his skin, his clothes, his place on the sidewalk. In the eyes of strangers, he was guilty before he was anything else. That truth weighed heavier than the heat of the afternoon, heavier than the shouts and flashing lights. In the days that followed, stories about the billionaire's unlikely savior spread online. Some celebrated Marcus as a hero, a man who rose above prejudice to help someone who had everything. But Marcus knew the deeper truth, that it should never have taken a billionaire's cry for help for people to see his humanity. His worth wasn't new, and it wasn't defined by one dramatic moment. It had been there all along, ignored until the world had no choice but to look. And that's what makes his story matter, because Marcus's experience isn't rare. It's a reflection of countless others who live in the shadow of bias, dismissed until tragedy or spectacle forces their existence into view. Racism doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the hesitation of an officer's step, or in the silent judgment of a passing glance. Marcus went back to his corner, the same cardboard sign in his hands. But now, more people stopped, not because they finally saw him, but because his story had become a mirror they couldn't ignore. So the question remains, how many more lives, how many more Marcuses will it take before we stop seeing color first and humanity second?